It's probably no surprise that the Utah legislature is going to address election integrity this year on the Hill. It's something that's come up a lot, especially in the last several election cycles, and there's so much to it in terms of signature gathering, in terms of the mail-in voting and whatnot. But what was surprising to me a little bit, Holly, was the breadth of this bill. We're talking about Mike McKell's Senate Bill 194. 157 pages long, and it addresses so much. It's what we call an omnibus bill, which means it really effectively
Which is
6 or 8
unusual
bills.
in Utah. We don't usually do omnibus bills. So for people who follow the lines of a bill, this bill is 5,302 lines long. So 157 pages for normal people, 5,300 lines for political nerds like us. So super, super big, makes a ton of changes. And the reason it's so big is because of all the different areas of code that it impacts. And so you have to make the changes in all of those areas. So we have with us in studio KSL NewsRadio's Adam Small to talk to us a little bit about the overview. And then in our next segment, we're going to also have the bill sponsor, which is Senator Mike McKell, on with us. Hi, Adam.
Hello, guys.
Adam, what struck you most about this bill? I mean, there's so much to cover here, but just if you could just outline one or two things that you're looking at.
Yeah, so first off, shout out to the D News. They actually went through this huge bill and were able to talk with Mike McKell a little bit beforehand as well. So I am giving them that as I've been combing through what they've basically picked out as some of the biggest changes of this, because it's a huge bill. It would take forever to read the whole thing. One of the biggest things is, so Utah is one of the states where, as far as I'm aware, a lot of states' voter rolls or the list of the names of registered voters in your state, a lot of states have that information publicly available. Utah, our voter rolls are private. One of the biggest things Mike McKell's bill would do, it would remove that, well, or at least it would, D News put it, they would say narrow that private designation, but it really means you're going to make those voter rolls public unless a specific voter can come in and say, hey, if my name is out there on these rolls, I'm going to face a threat of some kind. Like, it's not safe for my name to be out there.
Right.
Again, that'll be a case-by-case basis, but it would largely make our voter rolls public, from what I understand. That's a big change. Another thing we were talking about, too, is this came after there were some complaints that came in from last election in what would be 2024, where, because for those that don't know, the lieutenant governor in Utah is the state's chief elections officer. They oversee everything elections in the state. And I guess there were some complaints after Lieutenant Governor Deidre Henderson was overseeing an election. She and Governor Spencer Cox were running for re-election themselves. And now this bill would make it so if there's an apparent conflict of interest, which again, the question still remains what qualifies as a conflict of interest. I assume it would be something like that, but that may be a question for Senator McKell. It would require the lieutenant governor to basically lay out a framework of, if there's apparent conflict of interest, here's what we're going to do, here's how we're going to approach it, and here's who could step in the LG's place to oversee that given election. Those are probably the two biggest ones I took out of that.
So let me say, there has never been a complaint before that I'm aware of where there has been a male lieutenant governor overseeing the elections. So we'll say the current governor used to be the lieutenant governor. Nobody complained when he oversaw that election. So I have to ask, as a woman, is this a gendered issue? Like, why now? Why this complaint? And by the way, over the last election, they did have somebody else. They had the former Lieutenant Governor, Greg Bell, actually, who stepped in to help oversee that particular part of the election. And I will also point out the Lieutenant Governor does not count the ballots. That's each county clerk.
You know, I remember years ago, Holly, I was asked to represent one of the county clerks without mentioning name, and because a challenge had been brought by her competitor, because her name was on the ballot, and it was on every page of the ballot, and not just the one where she was running for office. And they asked us to change that. It was a kind of much ado about nothing, but it was an interesting conversation we had. It was probably 20 years ago, but I just remember that, and I thought, well, okay, that's a little bit different when you're talking about the county clerks who are actually producing these ballots.
Well, exactly, right. Anyway, there's a little bit of frustration on my part, but I will also say there's some other interesting things. And Adam, I wonder if you know anything about the citizenship ID requirements, because it seems like there's a lot.
Yeah, there's a couple different bills, and this bill hits on it too, about ensuring that every voter in Utah is a registered voter is a U.S. citizen, which is what the federal law is as well. Now, Mike McKell's bill, I believe, is one that would create the system where, in essence, if you can't present proof of U.S. citizen, like documented proof of U.S. citizenship when you register to vote, I guess some members of the military get ballots like this where you get like a federal only ballot, like you vote in the federal elections, but not necessarily the state elections in some cases. At least that's what was outlined in what I was reading. But I guess this bill's looking to do something like that where, hey, if you can't prove your citizenship, we're not going to allow you to make decisions in at least the state elections, like the offices here. And obviously there's another big bill by Corey Malloy, who's Representative Corey Malloy, who wants just basically to add more safeguards to where you would have to show, like, because when you register to vote now, it's pretty much, you put out your basic information and stuff like that.
Yeah.
But he wants you to bring in documentation to be like, this proves I'm a U.S. citizen. So the two kind of work hand in hand that way.
It seems to me like, and we'll ask the bill sponsor when he comes on next, but it seems to me like we already have that in play. And so I'm wondering why we need additional stuff. And one of my questions is, do you need to show that you're a citizen when you go to vote at the ballot box, right? Or when you're mailing it in, which is interesting to me because you've already proven that when you register to vote.
Yeah, and you have to prove that nowadays even to get your driver's license.
Yeah,
There's certain
right.
steps. Hey, Holly, let me ask you a question. Voter roll. What does a voter roll show? Just that a person voted in a particular?
No,
or
so
that
voter roll is going to be identifying. It's not going to be your social security number, your driver's license number. It's not going to be that, but name, address, phone number, and party affiliation, right? So for example, for a candidate who says, I would need the voter rolls so that I can contact the people in my district, that's what you get. Is you don't get their private identifying information, but you do get name, address, phone number, email if they include that, and then their party affiliation.
Okay, so what would this bill do that we're not currently doing? Allow that to be available to candidates?
Everybody. No, it's already available to candidates.
That's
it
what
would
I
be
thought.
publicly available.
Okay.
So it would just be basically open voter rolls. You can go see if anybody's registered to vote. Anybody you want to, you can go and see.
And a lot of states already do that?
I don't know.
Okay.
But apparently. So to your point where you Adam, where you were saying, except for people who can go say this would be a threat to me, I can think of some elected officials who don't want their information publicly available. But I also thought about people maybe who have been victims of domestic violence, or they have a restraining order, or there's a hostile ex partner or something, that they might also be the ones in that category. But basically everybody, almost everybody would be publicly available. I would also say potentially maybe some really high profile people who live in Utah who maybe don't want their private information out there.
But that's what troubled me when you mentioned that. It includes their mailing address.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. So you have to be able.
That'd be a problem. Yeah.
You have to be able, especially as a candidate, you have to be able to talk to, or reach the people that you're trying to reach.
Makes sense. Thanks, Adam. Thanks for joining us this morning. That was Adam Small from KSL NewsRadio.
That was fast. When we come back, we're going to continue talking about that bill with the bill sponsor, who's Senator Mike McKell. So stay with us.
Let's continue our discussion of the election bill, Senate Bill 194, put forward by Utah Senator Mike McKell. We talked about it a little bit at the last segment with Adam Small from KSL NewsRadio. Holly, this is a huge bill. It addresses a lot, maybe more than we can do in even 2 or 3 segments. I mean, we could spend a day on this, but we'll spare our listeners that.
So this omnibus election bill is 157 pages. It's 5,300 lines of code. And Senator McKell, why this gigantic bill? Thanks for joining us, by the way.
Hey, I appreciate it. And let's not spend 2 or 3 segments on it. I think it's a little more simple than that. But sometimes when we have election bills, there's really not as much change in code, but we include those sections in these bills. I've got it in my hand. It is a big bill, but this is a continuation of last year. We spent some time. I worked with Representative Burt on House Bill 300, and there's some additional changes that we are going to make. But we do address a lot of issues in this bill, and I'll let you fire questions, and I'm happy to tackle some of those issues.
Okay, I have some. So
I knew you would.
So there's some things in here that make me raise my eyebrows a little bit. And I have to say, one of them is specifically aimed at making the lieutenant governor have a plan if she's overseeing, or a he in the future potentially, overseeing an election. So my question, of course, is this has been in place for a long time. Why this year? Why now are you saying, oh, well, there has to be something in place? And by the way, there was last time as well, and former Lieutenant Governor Greg Bell stepped in to help in that spot.
Well, and you bring up a good point. And let me just be clear. I don't question our Lieutenant Governor. I think she's done a great job, and I think she did a great job during the last election. This was an issue in the last election, and it was an issue when Governor Cox was the lieutenant governor. And in both scenarios, they both put a plan into place to resolve any perceived conflict of interest, and I think they did that. I think they did a great job, and I don't question our lieutenant governor. I actually think she's doing a great job, and she did put Greg Bell in place. But what we're doing in this bill is we're going to put that process in the code, so we have a clear guidance in the future. And you're exactly right. In the last two instances, with both Lieutenant Governor Deidre Henderson and then Lieutenant Governor Spencer Cox, they followed a very similar process. I think there's value in putting that in the code in case we have problems in the future, and that recognizes that we didn't in those two last instances, and I think they did it right last time. But I think we should have best practices, and I think we should have the process in the code.
And just a follow up to that, would there be any indication that this would apply down at the county level? So a county clerk supervising an election where he or she is on the ballot, is there something that would impact that as well?
I'm looking at language to do that. I am concerned. I mean, for example, you mentioned the county clerk level. We've got a candidate in Utah County that's gathering signatures to challenge a sitting clerk, and I am concerned that the current clerk would be able to verify and validate the signatures for an opponent, and I think that is a conflict. And hopefully in Utah County that there's a process in place to resolve that conflict. But I'm looking at that as well. Obviously, you nailed it from the start. There's a lot of pages to this bill, and I'm not trying to make it longer, but we may resolve that this session as well.
And speaking of signature gatherings, Senator, can you tell us what the bill does with respect to changing current Utah law as it relates to candidates gathering signatures?
Yeah, I'm concerned about countywide races. With a state Senate race or a state house, would impact my colleagues. We have a fixed number, so for a state House of Representatives, you're required to gather 1,000 signatures. State Senate, you're required to gather 2,000 signatures. Right now, a county threshold, if you were to run in Salt Lake County, you'd be required to gather 3% of registered voters. And that threshold is way too high. When you break down the numbers, that's over 18,000 signatures. And that's not something in a race like a county clerk, a county auditor, where a lot of folks don't pay attention. There's not a lot of campaign donations. It's hard to fundraise. That's not possible. So what I've done in the bill is I've capped countywide races at 2,000 signatures. I think it's egregious how high those signature thresholds are right now, and I think they need to come down.
I have another question, of course, and this has to do with requiring the lieutenant governor to audit Utah's voter rolls for proof of U.S. citizenship. I think that they just did that, and over 2.1 million voter rolls, they found one person who was a registered voter who had not voted, but who was not a citizen who had registered. What is the purpose of requiring the lieutenant governor's office to do something that they already did?
Well, if you read the language of the bill, let me back up and just say I think that was great news. I think the lieutenant governor has done a good job reviewing those voter rolls. I've had a chance to speak with Lieutenant Governor, and so far she's pleased with that result, and it's given her office an opportunity to look at all of the safeguards that they have in place and to make sure those safeguards are working. And clearly from that data that you see with the Lieutenant Governor's office on that review, those safeguards are working. The code already requires these audits, So what the bill does is it simply says audit is necessary. So it does make a minor change, but those audits in elections are already required on an annual basis, and we simply change that. We modify that to as necessary. I will say this is an omnibus bill. I think that's a fair description. The language dealing with that issue also is in Representative Malloy's bill, House bill, and he has spent a lot of time working with the Lieutenant Governor's office, resolving their concerns. And ultimately, this language may be decoupled from the bill that I'm running. I think Representative Malloy has done a lot of work. I had a chance to talk to the Lieutenant Governor, and I think she's appreciative of the language and his effort to work with his office, and he's done that. He's done the hard work, and he's got very, very similar language, but ultimately it may be decoupled from my bill because he's done such a good job with it.
I have another question, of course. So
Yeah.
this has to do with making voter records public. Is that just tell me what would be available to people and why this change?
So this policy is coming through, and you'll see it in another bill that Senator Johnson's running. We've got a concern, both Republicans and Democrats. It's hard to manage party affairs without clean and transparent voter rolls. And we want to make sure that those voter rolls are available to the public. I do still have some concerns, and I'm still working through language in my own mind. You may remember my private voter file. My private ballot was pulled out to look whether or not I put a stamp on or not. So obviously I have concerns. I had some windows broken out at my law office while we were in session, and when that happened, I actually made my voter file private, and I think I had a legitimate reason to do that. So we're trying to balance those privacy concerns, those safety concerns, on top of the concern that parties do need to be able to function, and they do need to know who their members are. So we're going to continue to work through that issue, but it's a tough issue, and I understand the concerns on both sides.
Senator McKell, Utah has been way ahead of the curve, I think, with respect to mail-in voting. Does this bill address or make any changes to what we're currently doing with respect to our mail-in ballots?
No, we're going to preserve mail-in voting. The only thing we look at is how do we verify that signature on the ballot, and the bill that I have strengthens that. I know Representative Burton's got some language that also strengthens that, but I'm going to do everything I can to preserve vote by mail, but at the same time make sure our verification process is robust. I think there's a lot of confidence in our elections that when you look at the polling that's been put forward, it's clear that we're doing a good job. There's a lot of confidence in what we're doing, but we need to be careful to make sure that verification process is very strong and done appropriately.
I have a really quick question. We're pretty much out of time, but at which points do people need to verify citizenship? Because as I look at least the description of the bill, it sounds like there's multiple points where you have to verify that you're a citizen.
Yeah, and that is exactly right. We verify when somebody moves, updates their voter registration, applies for a driver's license. And I actually think that's a good question because the Lieutenant Governor's office had a chance to audit their process. And what they learned, and as you stated, is one person. Obviously, it's not done. They may find others, but those safeguards along the way have been working. Those protocols they've had in place have been working, and there are multiple steps. And I think they're doing a pretty good job. And I think that's evident by the audit numbers that we're seeing.
Thank you very much for giving us your time this morning. That was Utah Senator Mike McKell with a really good explanation of his long omnibus elections modifications bill.